Howdy everybody, Steve here, KM9G. I'm in my new ham shack here and I brought my mobile radio out of my truck to show you guys how to FT8 on the Icom IC-7100. I'm going to try and make this tutorial generic enough that you can run it on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. So where there's some differences from what I'm doing, I'm going to point out, and there's only two differences. I'm going to point out how to take care of those on your operating system of choice. If this isn't your radio, I have plenty of other tutorials on how to FT8 on plenty of other radios in this playlist up here at the top. This is going to be a pretty long video, so there are going to be chapters at the bottom of the YouTube window here where you can pick the thing that you're most interested in. This is one of the easier radios to get onto FT8, so let's get started with that. The external connections on this radio are going to be super simple. This is the front of the radio, just in case you think I'm pulling the wool over your eyes, and here is the back. And on the back you'll notice there's a USB port. All we need to do to make this work is take a regular USB cable, A on one side and mini USB on the other side, because this is a vintage radio. And the mini USB cable plugs in to the USB port. Ta-da! Let's take a look at some of the internal settings on the radio. First off, I'm going to go through and I am going to do a factory reset. You don't have to do a factory reset. I just want to show you that all of the parameters that I'm going to set are the real parameters for this radio. The first one is that we want to make sure that anything like preamp is turned off. So we'll hit the preamp button to get rid of preamp. You want as much of a raw signal as possible going into the computer. Next up, you want to change your filter from filter 2 over to filter 1, which is by default your widest filter at 3K. Then you want to long press the filter button. You want to hit bandwidth, and you want to make this as wide as you can, which is 3.6. And that will send as much data into your software as possible, and that's what we want. Next up, we want to modify our AGC setting, and we want to turn that off. And there's not really an easy way to turn it off. You have to go in to set it to one of the AGC settings. Let me turn that down real quick, and we'll turn it back up again, because it's important. And it's currently set at 6 seconds. And if I change that down, you heard that the sound just skyrocketed off the charts. That's what you want. You want, again, as much data coming out of the radio going into your software as possible. So AGC off, and that's how you do that. And then your radio has a bunch of really cool features down here. Noise blanker, noise reduction, notch. You want to make sure you turn off the notch. Make sure you have no noise reduction on, and make sure you don't have noise blanker on unless you happen to actually be in a situation where you need it, like a car where you've got that ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk from your alternator. Inside your shack, you probably don't need it. In your car, you might, and this is a mobile radio, so I want to point that out. Let's turn that sound back down again. We're going to go into connectors in the settings menu, because we need to make sure that we're getting data out the rear end of the radio. So I'm going to scroll down through here. So set, connectors, scroll down until you find data mod, and by default it's set to accessory, which is the big 13-pin port on the back of the radio, and we're using the USB port. So I'm going to pick USB instead. So data modulation goes out the USB port on the rear. Next up, I want to show you about heat management on this radio. Long press the meter, space, and then you get the full range of meters. And down here you can see a temperature reading. And right now I am in the cool setting. Whenever you're operating FT8, you want to make sure that your radio isn't overheating. So if it starts to get up to here, turn it off, let it cool down for a little bit, and then you know that you're using too much power for your current environment. So back your power off so that you're not turning your radio into a heater. I'm going to use a Raspberry Pi because I can control a lot about the Raspberry Pi, and it's small and portable, and this is a portable radio. So let's get over to our Raspberry Pi screen. There will be links for all of this stuff in the description down below, so you don't need to take too many notes. There will also be chapters at the bottom, like I had mentioned earlier. First thing we're going to need to do is get you the software, and you go to the WSJT-X website, which is right here on my screen. And as we are scrolling down, you'll see a whole bunch of information, documentation, all kinds of stuff that you need to know. And then you get to the install packages. So here are the install packages for Windows. Here are the install packages for Linux. I'm going to be running Raspberry Pi. And then here are the install packages for Mac OS. And Mac OS has kind of a weird thing with shared memory. And if you read the documentation that comes with the installer, there's a little file called readme first or something like that. It actually gives you the command to copy and paste into a terminal window to increase the shared memory size. You need to reboot for it to take effect, and then WSJT-X will work fine on your Mac OS machine. Once you get that downloaded, though, installing it is all on you because I'm sure you've installed computer software before. Let's get to step number 2. Step number 2 is to make sure that your clock is synchronized. WSJT-X depends heavily on time synchronization, and so we need to make sure that our clock is synchronized. And this website, time.is, what the time is going to tell you what the time is. And what it tells me is my time is exact. And if your time isn't exact, make sure that you have a connection to the internet, or you synchronize your time, or you verify your time through some useful external source. GPS works out really well. Listening to WWV works out really well. Using a network time protocol NTP server works out really well. Most modern operating systems have this stuff built in, but in order for it to work on like a Raspberry Pi, you need to set the clock when the machine boots up because it doesn't have any kind of battery backup. When you turn the machine off, it forgets what time it is. There are solutions for that, but that's beyond the scope of this video too. The point here I'm trying to make is just make sure that your time is accurate, because that will have a problem a little bit later on in life for you if you don't. For Linux, it comes as a handy-dandy apt package already in the repository. It's version 2.6.1, good enough for what we're doing today. If you want to be on the bleeding edge, use that download page from before. All right, we've got WSJT-X up and running already. And there are a couple of windows that pop up. This first one that pops up tells you all about all kinds of useful stuff about it. Down here in the bottom corner is a do not show this again choice, and it just disappeared. I didn't get a chance to click it, because I have seen this and I don't want to see it again. So now I won't see it again. You can see it again if you want. That's up to you. We need to get some settings done in order for this radio to work. So the first thing I want to do is I want to name this configuration for my Icom IC-7100. If you're going to have more than one radio, this is a pretty easy trick in order for you to switch back and forth without having to go through all of the settings changes all over again. Configurations, default, rename, and I'm going to call this IC-7100 because I'm really clever with naming things. From there, I'm going to go to the File menu and I'm going to choose Settings. Under the General tab, there are some things that you need to enter in, and the most important ones are highlighted in pink here. So I'm going to put in my call sign, KM9G. You're going to want to put your call sign in there unless you would like to impersonate me. That wouldn't be very friendly. Next, I'm going to need to find my Maidenhead grid square, and there's a website for that. And this website, again, will be linked in the description down below. This is from Levine Central, and I think this one is pretty slick. I am currently, where am I? I don't even know where I am. I am currently in Eagleville, Missouri. So I type in Eagleville, Missouri, and I hit submit, and it tells me that my grid square is EN30AL. So I'm going to copy all of that, and I'm going to put that into the WSJT-X software. You can get away with doing 4. It only sends 4, but it says preferably 6, so I give it all 6. From there, all of these options here are for you to play around with and to tinker, because that is the spirit of ham radio, is tinkering and playing with things. I'll show you the options that I like to have. I like to have a blank line between decoding periods. I like to display distances in miles because I'm in the US and that's what I grew up with. The rest of that stuff I don't worry about on that part. Double click on call sets TX enable, yes. Calling CQ forces call first. That's important because otherwise you'll call CQ, a bunch of people will answer you and the computer won't respond. You have to pick who to respond to, and they might be gone by the time you remember the people have answered you. I do this allow TX frequency changes while transmitting because sometimes I find out that even though I've been on this frequency for 17 years, someone has moved in on my frequency and I'm not getting heard as well as I used to. If you don't check this, you have to wait until you're finished transmitting and then you can shift frequencies. When you check this, the software will change the frequency while you are in the middle of transmitting, which is pretty useful. From here, we have to go to the audio tab because if you go to the radio tab next, it complains. And the reason why is because I don't have any audio device set. So I'm going to change my audio device. Your Icom 7100 will show up as a USB audio codec. So we drop down the list and we pick the Burr Brown from TI USB audio codec, and it's going to be towards the bottom of the list. And it will say input in the name. And we want to do the same thing for output. Once we have our input and our output set, we can go back to our radio tab. I'm going to pick rig as Icom IC-7100. This one works great right out of the box. Some radios you need to pick a different transmitter because they speak the same language, but there isn't one in here, or the language they speak isn't all that great. And this is in numerical order, so there is my Icom 7100, and then I need to pick my port. You're going to see a couple of ports when you plug that USB cable into your computer. Pick the lower one. Change your baud rate to 19.2. Leave the rest of these on the left-hand side at defaults, the way they come out of the factory. For PTT method, you want to pick cat, and it will automatically use the TTY USB 0 port. This is the same port that you've already picked over here on the left side, which is why it's going to use that. On Windows, go into Device Manager and look for your COM ports. And what you'll do is you'll see a COM port. It might be obvious, it might not. If you unplug the cable, it will disappear. You plug it back in, and it will show up again. That's the one that you want. On Mac OS, it's going to be /dev/cu.number something, or dev tty number something, and there's going to be two sets of two for CU, two for TTY. I believe it's the CU version. For mode, you're going to want to have data packet. This is going to have WSJT-X tell the radio to go into data mode, which is going to shove all the sounds out the back port into the computer instead of out the speaker on the back of the head unit. Down here for split operation, you can choose none or you can choose fake it. Rig didn't work for me. It would work fine on receive, and then when you went to transmit, it would go to the other split frequency and it would forget that it was in data mode and wouldn't work because it's not in data mode anymore and it's not receiving input from the rear of the radio. So I put it into fake it or I put it into none. Now we want to hit test cat, and this takes a while sometimes for it to respond, but you want to wait for it to go green or you want to wait for it to throw an error message up at you. One of the things that you can check if this light never comes back green is you can press it again and watch the frequency display on the radio. In my case, the frequency display just shifted, so I know I've got everything set up right. Next up is test PTT. Click that, you should see the radio go into transmit mode. I'm pointing over my shoulder because that's where my radio is. And it went into transmit mode, no problem. That proves that my cat control and my PTT control over cat is working. The next thing that I like to change in here is to go to the reporting tab and I say prompt me to log QSO, and then I say enable PSK server reporting because I want to be friendly. All of the signals I hear, whether I am transmitting or receiving, whether I'm at the station or not, as long as my radio is on and the software's up and running, all of those signals will be uploaded to PSKReporter. So other hams out there in the wild can see that their signal's being heard. They won't be able to work me if I'm not here, which is why sometimes you'll see that people hear you on the PSKReporter website, but nobody's responding to you. They're actually not at their station. They're just doing you a favor and letting you know that they heard you. And then I say to use a TCP/IP connection, and that shouldn't say use TCP/IP. That should say use TCP. And what TCP is versus not using TCP, you'd be using UDP instead, is TCP says, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? And it waits for the computer to respond, acknowledging reception. And if it doesn't get an acknowledged reception, it will keep retransmitting until it gets up there. UDP just kind of throws it at the wall, and who cares if it hears it? And then these other settings are for if you had ham clock in your shack, or if you had a logging program that you were using, or if you had geochron or something like that, you could actually send all the spots that your station hears to your map. That's a pretty slick feature. And then down here, this secondary UDP server, that's for Frequency Frenzy, for the FT8 poker game that we have on the Frequency Frenzy channel. There'll be a link for that in the description down below as well. Love to have you join in the contest. And that's about it for the settings. Next up, let's talk about some of the things in the WSJT-X main window. On the left side over here, you'll see what's called band activity. And it will give you the UTC time. It will tell you the decibels that your station hears their station in. It will tell you the DT, the delta time, how far your clock is from their clock. Your clock is right because you've already checked it. Their clock is not as right as yours is. And so the closer this gets to 0.1, the better off you will be. And every so often, you'll hear a little straggler come out at the end of the whole rest of the team. And you can come in here and you can look and you can see who it is because they're the ones that have their time the farthest away. I've got a 0.6 is the biggest delta that I'm seeing here. But I'm still able to decode it because he's still within the window. There is a little bit of play in the window, but not much. Next up is the frequency that they are listening on. So I'm on 20 meters right now, and I'm listening at 14074, and this person is at 14074-1105 in your passband. And then the message shows you what message sequence they're sending out of the macros over here at the lower right-hand side. Over here is the RX frequency window. This is where it will show your calls going out, people responding to you. People that you're interested in will also show up over here on this side, and sometimes you can tell the person you were talking to is now talking to somebody else, and you should go find somebody else to talk to instead. Or wait, if that's your thing, but you'll know why they're not getting back to you. Down here are a whole bunch of buttons. I rarely use any of these buttons except for Enable TX, Halt TX, and Tune. Over here on the left-hand side is where you pick which band you are interested in working on. And I like to work on 20 meters. You'll often find me on 20 meters. This green light means that cat control is working, and the S means that you have split set up, either through rig or through fake it, and I've got it set up through fake it. This TX even first, you can only hear or talk. You can't hear and talk when it comes to doing FT8, and that is broken down into 15-second chunks. You listen for 15 seconds, you talk for 15 seconds. But on the 15 seconds that you're listening, if everybody else was listening, there'd be no activity on the band at all, and it would be a pretty boring mode. So some people need to transmit on even, some people need to transmit on odd, so that way people who are listening can hear people, and people who are talking can be heard. So you want to make sure that you are aware of what side you're on if you're trying to have a dedicated QSO, a targeted conversation with somebody that you're working with. Tell them you're on even, they should be on odd. Tell them you're on odd, they should be on even. Hold TX frequency is extremely important. This is usually unchecked, and what will happen when it's unchecked is when you respond to somebody, you will move to their frequency inside of the passband. And then you'll move again when you talk to somebody else, and you'll move again when you talk to somebody else. It's better if you hold the transmit frequency and make sure as a good operator that you are not transmitting over top of somebody else. I'll show you how to do that in a second. That brings us to our waterfall, and you can see that our waterfall is, 1300 wide? And the passband on your radio is 3 kilohertz for a single sideband, and we're not showing all 3 kilohertz. So the first thing that I like to do is change this bins per pixel from 2 up until my window shows some variant of 3000. And then it's going to have to redraw everything, so we need to wait for it to come back in. You can speed that up with this N average 5 by shrinking that down, and the waterfall starts to move a little bit faster, a little bit closer to real time. But the colors of the signals get a little dimmer. And this signal here was bright orange, meaning it was a very strong signal. And now that we've spaced it out over time a little bit longer, by having more samples per second, he's not as bright orange as he used to be. And he is somewhere around 1831. So let's go over here to our main window and let's look for 1831. So he's a -3, which is a really strong signal. It ranges from approximately -26, which means you can barely hear them, to +26, which means they're really strong. And he was a -3, which is pretty strong. The rest of these settings down here, you can change the color palette, you can change a whole bunch of different things, and have at it. Experimentation is what ham radio is all about. The next thing we need to do with this screen here is we need to find a nice clear space to operate. And so these yellow signals here are where other people are talking. And you want to find something as close to black as possible, and it's better if you find something as close to black on both sides of the transmission. So this is very black here, and then it's a little blue there. So there's somebody on that side. I'm going to go up here where it is black on one side and not as blue on the other, and that way I won't be interfering with anybody. So I right-click in the timeline. You can kind of do it anywhere and pick Set RX and TX Offset. And now you can see my chevrons up here at the top have moved to that part of the waterfall. So if I come back over here, we're almost ready to transmit. You see how this slider here on the left-hand side is red? There's a setting in the radio I'll show you on how to fix that. If you go into the set menu on the radio and you go to Connectors and ACC USB AF level, you can now turn that down. You want to have your radio's volume turned up so that you can hear signals with your ear, and then you turn that knob down until it starts to go green. And if there are no signals, you need to wait for them to come back. On my radio, that is around 25. Your radio might be a little bit different, and that might be because you have a better antenna or you have a better USB cable or something along those lines. You're getting more audio into your computer. You want to keep it somewhere out of the red is really the important part. And the louder it is, the more signals you're going to be getting and the more you're going to be decoding as a result. On the right-hand side over here is a power slider. This is where you control the output power of your radio, and this is going to help you out with your heat management as well as help you out with ALC. ALC is kind of an interesting topic. ALC is a circuit inside of your radio that will clamp down on the audio. If you are shouting into the radio, it will activate, and if you are whispering into the radio, it won't activate at all. And you want to have near zero, as close to zero as you can, ALC. FT8 is a PSK, or phase shift keying mode, and it's very sensitive to ALC. And again, you want to let the computer and the radio talk to each other as perfectly as possible as a good operator. So you adjust this power slider down until you see no ALC on the meter while you're transmitting. You can do this while you're actually trying to make QSOs and not interrupt on the band, or you can plug a dummy load into your radio and slide this down while you have the tune button clicked. That way you're putting out a signal. Otherwise you're not going to see anything at all. And again, you want to keep it down as low as possible. And right when that last bar disappears off the screen of your radio is when you want to turn it up just a little bit and make sure that you're right on the edge of having no bars on your radio's meter display. And if you have an external power meter on your radio, you'll notice that your power will go down when ALC is too high, and your power will go up right when you get it set right. So that's how you get maximum power out to the airwaves. All right, now we're all ready to make a QSO. We've got our ALC set properly. We've got our ears listening properly. We found a clean space on the band. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to hit the Enable Transmit button. And this slider down here tells me that I am not yet ready to make this happen. So I've got to wait for my turn. So once that gets up to 15 seconds, I'll start transmitting because I'll be on the next turn. Now we're transmitting. And we've done a complete cycle. Let's go check the map and see if anybody heard us. And here we go. This is about 80 watts from central US. Again, I'm in Missouri right now as I record this. You can see I'm in the center of the map here, and I've got a nice bit of coverage in the US. I've got some in Eastern Europe, Western Europe. I've got some in Europe, and then I've got some down in South America. Let's zoom in here a little bit. And you can see some of my signal reports and some of the people that have heard me. So up here in Iowa, I am at -7 dB. Over here on, what is that? Over here in California, I'm at -6 dB. So I'm getting heard pretty well. Down in southern Texas, I'm at -8 dB. Over here in Florida, I'm at +7 dB. This guy in Florida's got a good signal for me. I've got the pink blob turned on, and this pink blob is PSKReporter's best attempt, best guess at where most of my signal is going. It looks like it's going pretty well. That's based on signal reports, though, so as you can see, there's not many signal reports up here in Canada, so it's not going to assume that I'm getting in good to Canada. I might be getting in good to Canada, but there might not be anybody there listening right now. Alright, and because I had it set to prompt me to log QSO, it popped up this prompt to log a QSO. I just made a contact with K5EK. And I sent him a -2, and he sent me a +8. He's in FM06 grid square. And what I like to do is I like to put down my power level here. And like I said, I'm running about 80 watts. And I'll click the retain because I'm going to run 80 watts for the entire session of doing this, and I don't want to type it in every single time. And in the comments, I like to put down what antenna I'm using, which is a 17-foot width, and what radio I'm using, and fill out as much of this stuff or as little of this stuff as you want, and click OK. And that is how easy it is to get the IC-7100 up and running on FT8 using the WSJT-X program. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below and I'll answer them. And if I don't know an answer, somebody else over there might. All of the stuff that I showed you is linked in the description down below so that you can get off to a good start. There's a video right over here I think you'll enjoy next. Thanks for being awesome. I'll see you over there.